Good evening, everyone. Hope you all are safe at home. Uh, I'm starting today's discussion. Myself, Advocate Gauri Joshi. I have done my master's in law, and at the same time, I have also done my master's in environmental management. Since 2006, I have been working in the environment and forest sector as an enviro legal consultant. At the same time, I am also working as a lecturer in environmental laws. I go to all non-law background colleges wherein all the professionals are taking training at their master's level. Occasionally, I also go to University of Cologne, Germany, to take environmental law lectures. As I said, 2006 onwards, I have been in this particular sector and always been a student of environmental laws. The subject of environment and forest law is quite vast. I am really thankful to Vidhi Foundation and my dear friend Advocate Ranjit Ji Sangle to introduce me to this group of viewers, because it is an opportunity to reach out to a number of viewers and let them know that there is a full-fledged independent sector of environmental laws which is operating in our country. There are many colleagues in my fraternity or our fraternity who know that yes, there are environmental laws, but they generally are not aware about the spread of these environmental laws and what all laws are there when it comes to environment and forest laws. Before starting with the actual laws, let me tell you that unlike all my colleagues and speakers who have shared their knowledge with you so far, I will be talking generally about the sector. I'm not really going to discuss one particular law. And at the same time, I'm talking about the sector which or the laws which we have made for the group of living beings who do not have their own voice. So all the laws other than environmental laws are between the humans. So we have created concepts, we have decided what is right and wrong, and then we are governing our society on the basis of those concepts. Whereas this is the sector wherein we have created the laws assuming the rights of the non-humans, I would say. Most of the times we also believe that there are two different components, biotic components, that means living components and non-living components. But now science has started accepting that non-living components like river, probably jungles, they also have their own entities, and it is not true that they are non-living. They also live, they also have their stages, like the stage of I hope I'm audible again. Yeah. And so it is really important for us to understand this set of laws. Why these laws are very important for India? India is one of the most bio-rich countries. We are in tropical belt, and that's why the diversity which we have is tremendous. Please also understand that the cultural diversity, the diversity of languages, the diversity of food, all that comes from the diversity of nature. So in India, we have in all 10 biogeographic zones. The climatic conditions of all these 10 biogeographic zones are entirely different. And therefore, even when we are trying to govern all these different biogeographic zones with one set of rules and regulations, the reaction is different. And so this law has to have the combination of science and legal setup. Well, we all nowadays understand that what is the importance of environment. But even then, when it comes to human development and environment, our biasness is always towards development. Many a times, when working in the field, the questions come that what is going to happen if one single tree is getting cut down? Why the environmentalists are so sticky about having the roads from the forest? There are multiple reasons associated to it. Our entire existence is on this nature. So our basic capital, for a moment, just imagine, can you do any activity without using a natural resource throughout the day? Right now we are in the lockdown. We are not going to go outside. We are not doing anything which is so-called our work. But even then, is it possible for us to sustain without using any natural resource? The answer is no. And at the same time, if I'll ask the question how much pollution we have done since morning, I'm sure no one is there who can say that you have not done any kind of pollution, right? So it is that dynamic field which is daily touching our lives. Now, recently in 2017, the National Crime Control Bureau just analyzed the total crimes which are taking place in India, and they specifically referred to this environmental crime sector. And when they analyzed the data, they realized that in this environmental crime sector, 77% of the crimes are related to forest and wildlife related violations. Now, I have been practicing in this sector, not directly. Let me also tell you that I am working as a consultant, and so when it comes to standing in the courts of law, all my colleagues are there to help me out. I don't really stand in the courts of law directly. I try to strategize the entire case. But when we started working in this sector, me and my colleagues came across with a situation wherein very elderly advocates and counsels were really unaware of what is happening in forest laws, what is happening in wildlife laws. And so it is important for us to discuss, understand why these laws are there, why they came out, and what are they trying to do exactly. Now, prior to 1976, prior to the 1976, that is 42nd Constitutional Amendment, the word environment was not there in the Constitution of India. Right now also, I would say the term environment is not there in the Constitution of India. It has been inserted with this 1976 amendment. Certain other terminologies have been inserted. So Article 48A of the directive principles, they give the responsibility to the states. We all are aware that directive principles are non-enforceable by courts of law. Our judiciary proactively and through judicial activism sometimes has interpreted it in through fundamental rights, but otherwise by principle they are non-enforceable. So Article 48A gives the responsibility to the state, that is as per the definition of state is as per Article 12, that the state shall endeavor to protect and preserve the wildlife, the forest, and all the natural components. And at the same time, under Article 51A, subclause G, the citizens also have been given the responsibility to protect and preserve our nature. So both the government and the people are duty bound to protect and preserve the nature. Now, if I will tell you what is the importance again of this environmental sector and what will happen if the degradation is there. In 2013, when World Bank assessed that what is the cost of degradation which we the Indians are bearing, when I'm saying environmental crime or environmental degradation, it includes water pollution, air pollution, land degradation and desertification. It also includes wildlife crime. It also includes loss of biodiversity. So collectively, if we will take all these things into consideration, the loss is 80 billion rupees. Okay, that means it is almost 5.7% of the GDP. That is the cost which we are bearing of environmental degradation, and then it becomes very, very crucial for us to look into this aspect. Recently in late 2018 2019, Niti Aayog has also mentioned that by 2020, that we are living right now, most of the prominent cities of India will have no groundwater available which is easily usable, and by 2030, if we are not working in furtherance to it, most of the cities in India will face water crisis. So that is the situation, that is the alarming condition, why we need to know, understand the importance of environment and environmental laws. Now, generally in India, all these laws are collectively called as environmental laws. But for our understanding, let me say that there is a separation of these laws. That means a part of the laws, one sector is dealing with prevention of pollution, to which I will refer to environmental laws, and there is other sector which is actually trying to protect and conserve whatever we have, that is conservation laws. So we will first deal with the conservation laws. I will keep giving you the overviews of all these conservation laws as well as the environmental laws. Okay, so conservation laws, India is blessed with very rich culture, and in fact, if historically we will see, the first lawmaker for the environment would be Samrat Ashok, who actually defined certain rules and regulations as to how to utilize the forest, which forest can be utilized, which shouldn't be utilized, so on and so forth. In between, we followed many dynasties, and many dynasties created number of different laws to deal with the situations in their own areas. In the British period, with different intentions, but Britishers started creating different laws to take more and more resources under their control and keep the civilization, or keep the local people away from all these natural resources. I will directly talk about what laws we are using right now. So first law I will be discussing is the Indian Forest Act. The Indian Forest Act was enacted in 1927, again pre-independence period, but we have adapted to this particular law. Now if you will see the nature of this law, it is actually for the consolidation of all the previous laws which were in existence in different parts of the country. This particular law has actually bifurcated the forest land into three different categories. One is called reserve forest, second is called protected forest, and the third one is called as village forest. Viewers, please understand, many times आपल्याकडे डेव्हलपमेंट प्लॅनमध्ये किंवा रिजनल प्लॅनमध्ये वनीकरण झोन असतो, स्पेशली रिजनल प्लॅनमध्ये, आणि खूप वेळेला आपल्याला असं वाटतं की वनीकरण म्हणजे फॉरेस्ट. तर तसं नाही आहे. फॉरेस्ट म्हणजे जे नोटिफाय केलेलं असतं गव्हर्नमेंटनी, त्याला आपण फॉरेस्ट लँड असं म्हणतो. वनीकरण हा झोन झाला की जो टाउन प्लॅनिंग डिपार्टमेंट किंवा स्टेट लेवलचे लँड लॉज डिफाईन करतात, त्याचा गव्हर्नन्स कसा करायचा. वनीकरण झोनमध्ये सुद्धा फॉरेस्ट असू शकतं, म्हणजे मी असं नाही म्हणत आहे की वनीकरण झोन इज डिवॉइड ऑफ फॉरेस्ट, बट देर इज अ डिफरन्स बिटवीन फॉरेस्ट लँड आणि वनीकरण जे रिजनल प्लॅनमध्ये दर्शवलेलं असतं. कमिंग बॅक टू फॉरेस्ट ॲक्ट. सो in one of the conferences, very elderly forest officer once told me a very quick definition of how to differentiate between reserve forest and the protected forest. So he said that in the reserve forest, everything is prohibited unless specifically permitted. That means even the entry is prohibited. Now, since the first act of 1878, Forest Act of 1878, using the Land Acquisition Act, lot of forest lands have been defined in India. And these forest lands, as I said, if have been acquired completely, if the rights have been settled, they are called as reserve forest. So most of the activities are prohibited in the reserve forest. People cannot go inside the reserve forest, they cannot collect unless it is specifically permitted, they cannot collect forest produce, non-timber forest produce, lot of prohibitions are there. In the protected forest, everything is permitted unless specifically prohibited. When I'm saying everything is permitted, doesn't mean that we can do the developmental activities. All the pro-forest activities or whatever land use was there, that can continue in the protected forest. The basic reason behind this is protected forest is not, I mean, by law, can be declared only on the government land. So if the government has some proprietary rights over it or superior rights over it, or the land belongs to the government, then only government can declare this protected forest. Third category is village forest. Now, when Britishers did the survey, Mr. Baden-Powell and Dietrich Brandis were the people who were appointed to do this, the surveys, and they realized that India, unlike many Western countries, has a huge population which is directly dependent on the forests, and that's why their rights need to be protected. Otherwise there would be a lot of agitations against this activity of declaring reserve forest or protected forest. And so what they did, they identified the areas for a couple of villages or a designated patch of reserve forest for few villages or one villages depending upon the area, and they decided that okay, this will be called as reserve forest, and those people, if they require anything from these forests for bona fide personal utilization, that means they cannot sell the products outside. So if they want to build their own hut, if they want to have fuel wood, if they want to collect certain material for their own consumption, they can go in this designated patch which is called as reserve village forest and can collect it. But for others, the status of this patch of forest land would be reserve forest. Okay, so we have seen these three categories: reserve forest, protected forest, and the village forest. Now somebody is asking in the chatting box about the Gir forest and different types of forest. I'll come to it. Okay. For a time being, just understand that under the Forest Act, we are defining these three subjects. There is one more aspect to it, and it was inserted through section 35 of the Indian Forest Act, wherein the authority was given to the forest department that if they feel that a particular patch of land is important from the protection point of view, because it is maybe on the slope under which or near to this slope the railway line is passing or the highway is passing, and if that slope is not maintained properly, then there might be problems for the commutation, or there might be damage to the railway line. Then such areas the forest department can assume the administration for 10 years, and within these 10 years they have to manage these patches, and after 10 years they can negotiate with the owner. So this particular aspect was kept in the Indian Forest Act. Later on, this particular section has been used by many states to develop the state level private forest acquisition act. इन महाराष्ट्र आपल्याकडे 1975 ला हा ऍक्ट आला, आणि त्याच्यामुळे प्रायव्हेट फॉरेस्ट ही एक अजून एक वेगळी संकल्पना तयार झाली. प्रायव्हेट फॉरेस्ट ही संकल्पना या ॲक्ट खाली गव्हर्न होते आणि आपल्याकडे खूप साऱ्या केसेस आहेत की ज्याच्यामध्ये प्रायव्हेट फॉरेस्ट असं लागलेलं आहे, ॲक्विजिशन झालेलं नाही आहे, लोकांचे राईट्स डिफाईन झालेले नाही आहेत, लोकांना ज्या अधिकारानं ज्या काही एक त्यातल्या पॅच परत मिळायला पाहिजे तो मिळालेला नाही आहे आणि खूप ओव्हरलॅपिंग सिच्युएशन्स पण तयार झालेल्या आहेत. कारण आपल्याकडे लँड लॉज पण सायमल्टेनियसली चालू असतो, हा प्रायव्हेट फॉरेस्ट ॲक्विजिशन ॲक्टही चालू आहे, फॉरेस्ट ॲक्टही चालू आहे, असे काही एक सिच्युएशन्स ज्याच्यामुळे इंटरसेक्टिंग प्रोव्हिजन्स या झालेल्या आहेत. फॉरेस्ट ॲक्टचा मूळ उद्देश जो होता इंडियन फॉरेस्ट ॲक्टचा, तो समाजाला फॉरेस्ट रिसोर्सेस युटिलाइज करण्यापासून लांब ठेवणे, सायंटिफिक फॉरेस्ट्री करणे ज्याच्यातनं रेव्हेन्यू जनरेट होईल. त्याच्यामुळे खूपशा राज्यांमध्ये तुम्ही बघाल तर अजूनही रेव्हेन्यू अँड फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट असं आहे, कारण फॉरेस्ट्री वॉज कन्सिडर्ड ॲज वन ऑफ द इम्पॉर्टंट revenue generating activity just like agriculture. Okay, all the environment and forest related laws have criminal remediation. Most of the violations are treated through criminal side of the remediation. So there are no civil remedies available to the violations, they become offense. Okay, this is about the overview of Indian Forest Act. Now, after the industrialization phase, many states started utilizing or de-reserving forest land for industrial purpose, for agricultural growth, etc. And then in 1976, again, we did the constitutional amendment. Earlier, the subject of forest and wildlife were in the state list. We know that there is 7th schedule in the Constitution of India wherein these lists have been defined, and according to these lists the central government, state government, they are taking the decisions. And so earlier the subject of forest and wildlife were in the state list. Now because most of the states, due to competition for industrial growth or to have more and more revenue through agricultural practices, started diverting the forest lands for industrial purpose or agricultural purpose. The central government decided that let us change this scenario, and so what they have done, they have removed these two subjects from the state list and have inserted these two subjects in the concurrent list. Now the situation is that pro-forest activities, forest management activities, declaration of forest can be done by the state governments. But if you want to divert the forest land, if you want to de-reserve the forest land, you have no other option but to go to the center. Without taking prior permission from the central government, we cannot divert. That means the states cannot divert the forest land for non-forest purpose. This is what has been defined by Forest Conservation Act. Now, even when Forest Conservation Act came in 1980s, I'm discussing it along with the Indian Forest Act so that it is easier for the viewers to connect the subject. So Forest Conservation Act is a very small piece of legislation. There are only 5-6 sections which are there in this particular act. And the most important section is section 2. Section 2 says that no forest can be utilized for non-forest purpose without taking prior permission from the central government. Okay, so this is about forest. Many mining activities, industrial activities, dam construction, hydroelectric power plants, then having highways, having railroads, inevitably the forest lands are there in between these overall plans, and that's why you can see that in the beginning I said that most of the violations are with respect to Forest Act. This is the reason why most of the violations are with respect to Forest Act, because it is colliding with the developmental activities. This is all about the Forest Act. Now I will shift to Wildlife Protection Act. See, there is difference. Please, I'm repeating something so that it will be easier for the viewers to understand. We have seen 3 different types of forests. 1, reserve forest, 2nd, protected forest, and 3rd, village forest, which are declared under the Indian Forest Act. Now I'm shifting to Wildlife Conservation Act. Wildlife Protection Act. Now you will see the difference. Forest